All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. We'll go ahead and get started. I know Freddie's running a few minutes late, but so we'll go ahead and start with introductions. I think most of us know each other. Do we want to skip introductions or?
I can call roll. I've got the list pulled up, so that would work equally. So,
okay.
Stephanie here, Will.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Freddie is running late. Ben.
Present.
Ryan.
Present.
Hey, Ryan. Daryl. Haven't heard from him. And Tracy. April.
Present.
Hey, April. And Martina.
Present.
And Rob. Okay, so we're waiting on Rob, Tracy, Daryl, and Freddie. But that's it.
Okay. I don't really have much to report or anything announcements, except for I would like to see if there's any volunteers to do notes for the meeting. I think a lot of the other committees have a committee member doing the notes instead of staff. So is there anyone that would like to volunteer?
You don't want me to do it?
Anybody else?
I promise you do not want April Calvin to do it. I promise.
Okay. All right. I'll do it just for this meeting, not like every meeting. How about that? I'll volunteer this meeting.
Okay, that works.
I'll be willing to do it in the future. I'll probably have to run a little bit early because I had a little COVID contact, and so I'm going to have to go do a test today. So I'm going to run in to Nissan Stadium probably right around 10.
All right. Well, thank you, Will. Ben, I hope that all works out for you. And thank you for volunteering to do it in the future.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, we have a lot on the agenda today, so we can go ahead and just get started. I believe that is starting with Rachel doing an ROI and data sharing check-in.
Thank you. Okay, so now that it has been more than 6 months since we've started our new release of information and data sharing processes in HMIS, we just wanted to give an update to this committee about how that's been going, feedback we've gotten, things like that. So feedback has been overwhelmingly good from participating agencies. It's been super helpful for collaboration, especially with all of the new ESG, CV, CARES Act funded projects that are heavily collaborating with each other. And we're like, how would we possibly do this without shared data and agency collaboration? So that has been really, really great and really good for data quality and making people's workflows a lot more simple and less cumbersome. So overall, good feedback. The release of information itself, you'll remember we had a kind of brainstorming in this group about how to manage like signing that document and whether it needed to be uploaded to the client's record. And we began by asking folks to scan it in and upload it as a file attachment. And then, of course, people were doing a lot of temporary verbal release due to COVID protocols and things like that. So that was a little different than that rollout may have been in normal times. And in the first probably 2 or 3 months, we did a lot of spot checking and monitoring of ensuring that people were tagging the new universal release correctly in the system, and checking in individually with our agency points of contact to have them follow up with their staff. And that takes a lot of time, turns out, to do that monitoring. So we will continue to do like spot checking, but I wanted to be transparent that at this time, we're not able to look as closely at every single record to make sure, not every single, but the records to make sure that the new release has been uploaded and that like attaching the document protocol has been followed. So yeah, our plan going forward is to include that messaging in our conversations with the agency points of contact and users in like new user trainings and things like that to remind them of the way of doing things. And we also have lots of like recorded training materials and slides posted on our website that are accessible to users. It's just a matter of following up and having agencies follow up with their people too. So for the most part, I think it's going well. We've had a huge explosion of new users and participating agencies in the past year, so it's a lot to keep up with, but overall, good results. Anything else, Shanley, that we've talked about that?
I don't think so. I think generally, yeah, I feel like I wish there were a better way to monitor the release thing aside from just happening upon them when they're done incorrectly. I think it would be great to have the support of all of the agency points of contact to really take that on as their role, and just making sure that they're diligent about what their staff are doing. But I don't know exactly how to roll that out. Maybe just telling them that would be helpful, or if we should create a formal like procedure for that. I'm not sure.
And it's not a concern that like people are being entered without a release. That's not what we're worried about. It's more of like the procedure of clicking the right way and like tagging it in the system, so to speak, so that it's easy to see that the person has, so that other users can see that that person has the universal release and not having to do that duplicate effort of getting it again, which is what we're trying to remove the necessity for in the first place. So,
is there any kind of query that could be run in the database that would show you releases that weren't tagged correctly?
Yeah, so we were able to run some reports that show like who has like the most recent release that has been tagged to a client. If it's something other than the universal release, then we would follow up with the point of contact at that agency. But that still is not super manual, but takes that like following up individually. So we'll continue to do some of that like spot checking, but yeah, a lot of times people will add the release of information in HMIS and attach it to just their agency instead of using, yeah.
So you can't see a list of all the releases and how they were tagged. You can only see the most recent.
Yeah, you can. I would just look at the most recent for the new implementation, basically. Okay. And look at like since it was implemented in August. If it was implemented since August, that the most recent one added was the new one, if that makes sense. But yes, we can see all of that.
Okay.
Rachel, let me ask you this.
Okay.
Sorry, Ben. Is there, or have you created, or could you create like a 1 page or like a cheat sheet? Because this seems to be something that would need to, I agree with you. I'd like to be able to go in there and know that it's already in for a person rather than have to go through that. It seems like a waste of time. But something we could even just stick onto a computer, or could we create, I mean, I guess I could ask Kelly if she could create something like
Yeah.
that.
I'm trying to remember all the different pieces like that we put out. I think there's a one-page thing, but we can send that back out to the points of contact now that some time has passed, and kind of do a second push of, now that we've been doing this for a while, let's double check our procedures and make sure to post this. I mean, it's hard when it's like posted in the office, not everyone's still in the office, but just so people will have it as a reference. That's a good idea.
Yeah, what I was thinking is with the queries, if you're able to see who entered them as well, you know, agency and then the user, usually there's particular users that have issues with remembering to enter stuff in correctly, in my experience. And so, you know, that might allow you to be able to follow up with the point of contact for the agency and say like, hey, it looks like the user and this user are having issues. Would you mind following up with them? That's what I do at the mission. You know, I will spot check data. Well, not spot check. I have a report, and then that'll tell me kind of where there are holes, and then I'll kind of follow up with supervisors about that.
Yes, for sure. That's definitely part of our workflow.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, well,
That's it.
well, thank you. And we can keep checking in on this, especially, I do think it's good that we have like a discussion about this stuff and how the point of contacts can help you guys, and not wait until we've been doing it wrong for a year and then have to change behavior. So we can keep talking about this and keep doing check-ins. All right, so I think our next thing is the data quality monitoring plan. So I will let Shanley take it from here.
Hello. So in last month's meeting, I said you would have received the draft, which you know you did not. So I'm so sorry. There were a few minor edits at this point, mostly like spelling and grammar that I just didn't get to complete. And so instead, I figured that it would be helpful, especially now there are a couple new folks on the committee, that we could recap it together. And then once we've had this conversation today, I'll draft up the monitoring portion of the document and send the whole complete thing before I leave for vacation next Friday. So that's my commitment. Will be posted on the government's website, so I will do it. Okay, so let me share my screen and give me one sec. Okay, so this is the same PowerPoint from last week that I basically read at you. And so I wanted to use it again and go through it a little bit more thoroughly, this time spending a little bit more time on reviewing what the data quality plan actually says and what the contents are. So the data quality plan, as some of you know, was created by several different participants representing several different committees. So we had primarily representatives of the data committee, but also from the standards of care committee and the performance evaluation committee. Considering the crossover of a lot of the committee's work, we felt that that made sense to have representations from each of those committees. And the group spent a lot of time looking through other communities' data quality plans and monitoring plans to set some baseline benchmarks for how and when data should be collected. I'd say one of the perks of being just slightly behind with the data quality plan is that there are lots of documents that have already been created by other communities so that we don't have to create the wheel. We, again, so we just reviewed a lot of different documents. We also had feedback from HUD technical assistants as well throughout this process. So we feel like this was fairly thorough, and I feel really good about what that group came up with. So the benchmarks that they created are regarding several different data quality elements. So that being timeliness of when data is entered into HMIS after it is actually collected from the client, how complete the HMIS record is, meaning is there missing information essentially, accuracy and consistency of the data that is entered. So that's really in regards to, that's got a lot to do with training. So there's language in there about what the HMIS lead's role is in terms of how to train folks consistently and what documentation and training guidance needs to be made available. And then coverage is a little bit more theoretical. So I think all of y'all have been on calls recently where we're talking about some of the big gaps in coverage in HMIS data collection in our community. So that section really just gets at where are we now as a starting point. I'll also say that the recommendations made by that working group indicate a best practice as sort of an aspirational goal as well as a starting point. So again, we looked at all these other communities and saw what they recommended as a best practice. We felt like maybe that wasn't very realistic for us in our community as a starting point. So we highlight that in the document, but also sort of create a path forward in getting there by creating a more realistic starting point. Any questions about the data quality plan before we talk about the monitoring portion? Okay. Well, and so this gets to what we really quickly talked about last week, but essentially the monitoring plan is the actionable steps that make sure that the data quality plan is actually carried out. So what the working group had established so far is that annually each of the participating agencies in HMIS will have a monitoring visit from the HMIS lead. I added that this would hopefully be in conjunction with other monitoring that's already happening. So we don't want to create like an extra monitoring visit for agencies. I know that's a lot of time for the agencies. So hopefully that will become streamlined together with anything else already happening. Each of the agencies will be measured against the benchmarks laid out in the data quality plan. So again, the timeliness, completeness, accuracy, and coverage that's identified in the data quality plan. And that on a quarterly basis, at least to start as we begin this process, we will encourage agencies to utilize a self-monitoring tool just to check throughout the year what their data quality is saying, what potential concerns there might be, and to essentially be working on those throughout the year instead of just once right before the monitoring visit. In conjunction with that, the HMIS lead would run quarterly reports that would sort of enhance the work that they're already doing in the self-monitoring self-check that we would send to the agencies to help support the work they're doing. So this is where we get into the conversation I'm hoping to have today with you all, which are the questions that we still have and really need a lot of feedback about. The first question that I would love y'all's opinions, feedback, thoughts on is when this should happen. So some things to consider are that right now the only formal COC monitoring that happens is for COC funded agencies. And Rachel, does that remind me, that happens in March?
Yeah, usually like it's dependent on the COC timeline for that year. So usually like end of February, beginning of March, generally. And Susie can chime in if needed on that. It revolves around when the deadlines are for the COC timeline.
So one of the recommendations was that we time this around that, not that the COC is like the most important funding in our community, but that because that's already happening, it might make sense to align that monitoring time frame with the communities. again, just to sort of streamline that. The other option would be to space these out throughout the year. I don't know what consequences that could have. I don't know if that gives anyone an advantage over another agency to make sure their data is up to standards. So let's discuss who has thoughts or feedback.
I think maybe doing them all around the same time, but more than just once a year is a definite. If you're going to monitor one agency, like for example, maybe take the month of May and schedule them all throughout that entire month. But maybe more semi-annual or quarterly, because I think sometimes, especially I'll speak for myself on my level, sometimes on my level, I think that data is great, or it's clean. We work on it every Friday. We do a data cleanup day. But there may be things that I'm not, viewing that may be vitally important,
Yes, that's a super good point. So that's sort of the purpose of the self-monitoring and the reports from our team too, is to throughout the year be catching those sorts of things so that at the annual monitoring visit, you're not caught off guard with a whole list of things that you thought were amazing that maybe are not. So I love that feedback. And yeah, so we want to offer a lot of support throughout the year too. So that, again, that's not a surprise.
The only thing that I would say is please don't have the monitoring during the winter months. The site visits, sorry.
Very good feedback. And honestly, when April said May, I was like, May. I was like, that could work.
Yeah.
Because the winter months are, so heavily scheduled for everyone. And then also the HUD reporting season of basically December to April of a lot of stuff that is on our team. And I would love for our team to be able to instantaneously take care of all these, at the exact same time. I think a month would be a lot, but as, perhaps realistic. If we split them all up and made that work. So I like that.
Hey, what is the CSC deadline for this stuff? Just when we submit, or
Yeah, Susie, do you have insight on that?
When you say the COC deadline, do you mean the deadline for submitting the application each year for the competition?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out, I guess. I think
it's across the board, Will. We don't have any idea. Sometimes it's July, sometimes it's September.
I know the competition's weird, but when in this presentation it says CSC deadlines, I didn't know if we had a deadline to submit data quality to HUD outside of that competition or not,
Yeah, when the site visits have taken place the past couple of years, to have, I think, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, we set an internal deadline for the PEC Performance Evaluation Committee to have those data quality scores by May 5th or something like that. And I think that is determined by their calendar that year of the COC kind of schedule.
Okay, because I think we'd obviously want this data, want to be able to collect and analyze and report out on this data prior to the NOFA decision making, I would think, right? Because we'd want it to be part of that process of determining, points, who scoring and stuff for NOFA, I would think.
Yeah, and what I wonder, Rachel, you know this more than I do, in terms of the system performance measures and the other, all this other stuff that you've got to submit by certain deadlines to HUD, in those markers that you're more aware of, does data quality play a huge role in one of them more than another kind of thing? I don't know.
The LSA or the longitudinal system analysis and the system performance measures both would be affected. And those are typically around January, February, and they look at a October to September year reporting period.
Right.
Yeah.
So that may be, I mean, that's, you know, that may be what we want to look for then, because it's that October 1st through the end of September year that they look at in terms of the performance measures, like, you know, has the time, length of time homeless been reduced, has the number of people who are homeless been reduced, all that crap. So we might want to look at that, Will, that each year, no matter when the deadline for the big competition is, they look at that former fiscal year in terms of performance and.
Right, so it might be like a fall, kind of late fall, like to avoid winter for with Martina. Like, it's a good point, but like, is this a fall activity then?
I think even no matter, especially with the quarterly self-monitoring, it might not really matter when the visits actually take place if we're still looking at the same reporting period. So that data that we're looking at that monitoring visit might be a couple of months old, but if it makes sense out of scheduling convenience for agencies and staff to have it in the summer or whatever, then we still looked at the same reporting period. Then as long as we kept that consistent over the years, then that might be okay too.
Hey, Shanley, Rachel, what is your capacity to, you know, be able to monitor all of the agencies, and what is your most open time frame? Is that summer, or is that another time? Because that's important to think about as well.
Shanley has unlimited capacity.
We're just bored. We're literally just sitting here bored.
Except for next week, Shanley, right? With vacation.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. I think the kind of like heavy reporting season for me anyway ends around May or so. And then there's kind of a lull as far as those big projects. So I think late spring or summer, probably, we will make it work. We're going to have a new person coming on board in the next month or so, specific to the ESG CV role, and that'll be a time-limited grant-funded position, but they will take the lead on the ESG portion of these. Do you have a thought for time of year, Shanley?
No, it is hard because ideally it would have, like, we would have as perfect of data as possible at the time we're sending it off to the federal government, but it really, those few months are crazy, I think, for everyone. And so I don't think it's realistic to do it before May-ish. But I think, yeah, Rachel's good point. Like, if we're looking at the same months, regardless of when we're actually looking at it, I think it works out. So we're leaning towards May.
Well,
and
would you
it
also,
sounds like, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, would you spread it out? I mean, you sounded like May, that's a really tight framework of getting all the agencies done. So maybe even bleeding into June. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but just giving you all enough time to do it well as giving a little bit of latitude to the agencies to have a couple months to be monitored.
Yeah, depending on what we decide for what the visits look like, I'll say in the past, when we do our data quality monitoring visits for the COC funded agencies, we would block like half a day for those. So I don't know, because we would look at files, we would look for accuracy between files and HMIS, things like that. So, and sometimes it wouldn't take you know, the whole time, but a couple of hours at least. And if we have 35, however many participating agencies currently, that might be something to sketch out a calendar and think through, really, because yeah, there's only so many days in a week.
Well, you probably need at least one day to actually do some other work besides monitoring, I would think. So it probably will bleed into June.
And Rachel and Shanley, in terms of data quality, I know that the agencies don't, you know, compare the paper file or whatever they have for the client that they're working with to HMIS. That's got to be done in terms of like a personal visit or somehow by you guys. But in certain terms of a data quality check, a self-check, any agency, any day of the week can pull that for whatever they enter into HMIS, right? I mean, so it shouldn't, it might be a mystery to agencies who are entering into HMIS, but it shouldn't be, because they can pull a DQ report that tells them sort of how that stuff's looking, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like asking them to do it quarterly would just be like as a bare minimum, just so we know that you're looking, like, kind of staying in tune with what that's looking like. But yes, you're correct. Anytime they can look at their own.
And a lot of agencies are already doing that. So a lot of the points of contacts are already very familiar with what the reports say about their data quality. So again, I don't think that that part is going to be new. So we're just giving them a more specific tool to use that would then be used later in the monitoring visit. So it just becomes a little bit more clear and concise. Okay, cool. I feel good about that. Does anyone have any concerns or other feedback about the May/June timeframe for when it happens? All right, awesome.
Sorry, just one more question. Are we giving agencies notice? Like, is that in our plan somewhere, like for their site visit? Like, do we give agencies like a 30-day notice or anything like that?
So, Rachel, would you speak to how that was currently done for the COC funded agencies, and maybe we can discuss if that sounds like something we'd want to mirror?
So we're going to want to like roll out the whole idea of this to the whole community, right? Because the COC funded agencies know that this is coming every year as a part of their programmatic monitoring visit. And other participating agencies, this will be new to them. So, but what we did for the COC funded agencies was they knew it was coming ahead of time all year, first of all. And then we would give them, I think, we would share the schedule of when they would be taking place, you know, make sure we found a time that worked for everyone, like the month before. And then we would pull 5 random client IDs for files to look at and send those to them, I think the day before. But yes, I like, if once we get on a schedule, I like the idea of them having plenty of notice and getting that kind of calendar set up. So that does bring the question, though, of like, when does this begin? Because once this is published and we roll it out, if like maybe will we have 1 quarter of self-monitoring and then go into the visits? Will we even be doing visits yet this summer? Like, are people back in the office? Lots of questions that take us down a whole nother road, but that's kind of what the process was for COC agencies.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was just thinking you could just do a Zoom call with all 35 agencies and do a check that way. I think that'd be very effective just for this round.
Yeah, I mean, even with we haven't had a quarterly agency point of contact call in a while, but next time we do one of those, to be like, run your data quality report.
Okay, so how do you, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I like the idea of continuing with how you've done it with the COC funded projects. I think that would work out. You have 30 days notice, and then that's how a lot of federal funders do their visits. They give you 30 days notice before they're going to come do their check, and then the day before they let you know which files they're going to check. So I think I like that, continuing with that.
All right, any other thoughts on that portion?
I've got a question for you guys. With all the, race to spend and a whole lot of smaller agencies that have never entered into HMIS before doing it now because of the huge amount of ESG funding, I guess I'm kind of thinking it primes the pump for a lot of inaccuracy. I imagine our data quality, as much as the agencies are trying to do their best, is probably going to, I don't know, maybe it's better than ever, but it seems to me like it's possible for it to be worse than ever during this, this year and say next year, while these agencies are just racing to try and get people into housing, not as familiar with rapid rehousing and not as familiar with HMIS. Are you guys seeing data quality take a dip?
I was going to say, I would think it's going the other direction, what you said it might be doing, because at least for these ESG CV funded agencies, their federal reporting is quarterly. We're having weekly work groups. Like, there's so much more like focus and support just because of the nature. We are disseminating weekly outcomes reports and data quality reports, like for the rapid rehousing stuff that, like, in an ideal world, I want to do for every single project every week, but like, this is our pilot, So I think we're seeing, especially with these newer agencies, a lot of times they're like more like in tune with, they don't want to mess up and they want to be doing everything, all the requirements and all that. So that's been kind of cool to see. Hopefully it continues. So we'll be working on sustainability.
Rachel, that absolutely makes me feel good, because not only for new agencies, I'm thinking over here at the Salvation Army for all of our new staff, thinking that how do we make sure that they have clean data? Just because HMIS is a very tedious data tool to use. So more training, I think, definitely has been helpful, and you reaching out, giving some one-on-one, help whenever needed has been beneficial. Thank you for that.
Okay, so I guess the next question we didn't really answer is, do we like push ahead since we just set May and June and do it next month? That maybe feels rushed. I don't know, maybe that would be good baseline data to have as like a really messy starting point. I'm not sure. What do you all think? Do we push ahead and do it this year just to have like an understanding, or do we give people a lot of heads up and use the first year as like the quarterly self-checks and then start next May?
I'd be inclined to say go for it, because I think it's one thing to do self-checks, and we've been through the monitoring process before and we thought everything was fine, and then and sometimes it isn't that there's something bad. Sometimes you can learn a new way to do something. I also think that if we can meet in person, that's all the better. We can figure out social distancing now. We can figure out some things, bigger spaces, times and that. But it is good. You said you've missed some of your quarterly point of contact calls. This would be a way to re-engage with your points of contact too. I personally would say go for it. I mean, if you can. I mean, obviously you've got a lot of staffing there. I think if you leave it, people just get complacent and potentially get complacent. Sorry, not that they will, but potentially. So I would just say go for it. I mean, it's not punitive. I mean, it's to help the agencies. So I don't see this as a bad thing. I see it as a resource, as a tool, and I do think it does give us heightened awareness. If I was to tell the staff, oh, we're not going to be monitored for another year, just think some people might take their foot off the pedal a little bit.
That's a good
I agree with
Or
Marlene.
whoever the group goes with.
One thing that I'll add that I was thinking of just as I posed the question was that this document does need to go through public comment and be formally approved, which won't be a quick process, as we know. And I don't know if that's going to prohibit us from actually moving forward or not. I see Will shaking his head now. I don't know.
We can still do it.
Yeah, I think we can still do it, but if we want that to be an excuse not to go on to it. Yeah, I think it's up to you all. Like, I mean, I like the go for it comment, even though I was about to answer the other the other way, because I'm very impressionable. But I think it's kind of like Rachel and Shanley, like, what do you all think, given that, you know, just given your capacity right now? You've mentioned that a few times, and your comfort level right now, given COVID and everything.
I think especially if we frame as this is the first one, and like this is introduction to data quality monitoring for the rest of time, but this is the first one, then it can be a little bit lighter than it might be. And even if it's just a touching base explaining, but we try to do it in person or schedule a specific time frame for a call, then it would set off the clock instead of just waiting. That might be smart.
I like that. And yeah, framing it as like a practice, even like this is what you can expect for like the big real deal next year after a full year of the support and self-monitoring. I'm also in the back of my mind concerned for these brand new agencies, or even the agencies we're trying to engage through street outreach efforts and things like that, to all of a sudden also add a monitoring visit. I don't know. But I like the idea of going ahead and just as a baseline and a practice round so that people know next year what to expect. Okay, any other thoughts or feedback about this? We have lots more questions to talk through. I'm afraid we're not going to get through all of them. How much time do we have for this, Rachel, on the agenda?
Well, the only other, we do need to talk about the license distribution plan policy, but that's the only other thing, and we've got about 40 minutes.
Okay, are you all comfortable with me moving forward to the next question, and we can circle back if we have more time? Okay.
Yes.
So the next question for you all is, what happens with the results of the monitoring visits? So obviously with COC funded agencies, that is very much used for funding allocation decisions and ranking and all that. So our process has different results. This is more for our community to understand what agencies are doing, what is our system doing. And so it's not going to be used in that same way. So what do we want to do with the results of the monitoring visits? Are they shared with just the agency? Are they posted somewhere? Is there a committee that's reviewing them? Thoughts?
I guess you said they're getting them from another committee for the scoring process. Did I hear you correctly? Like their actual data quality?
For the COC funded agencies, their monitoring process includes the same sort of portion of monitoring, and then those scores are used by the Performance Evaluation Committee to actually rank and score those agencies and recommend allocations of the COC dollars specifically.
So this would be duplication, but to help you all, correct? Like the actual.
Well,
go ahead.
so the thought is that this becomes like the big umbrella of monitoring, and that this process becomes, so we have the PECS process. That's been an awesome starting point for this discussion. But the idea is the entire community should have an understanding about what's in HMIS and what can be improved, et cetera. And so this sort of like becomes the head of that process. And from there, any other grants or community efforts could use process from this umbrella. So the COC PEC would then sort of take what we're creating and tweak it from there. I just talked a lot. I don't know if I said anything. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, Shanley, and it also helps with the strategic plan, just making sure that all of our processes are in alignment regardless of the funding, but making sure that our entire community is moving in the same direction. So I like it, using one tool across the COC universe.
And Ryan, just in terms of like the word monitoring, there's regulatory monitoring that goes on. That's where Connor from our shop and at MDHA would come and see you in terms of the ESG regulations and stuff like that. And there's a monitoring exhibit for that kind of stuff, all kinds of detailed questions that are just a real hassle. And then there's the performance evaluation committee that is more and more each year looking at the performance indicators of the continuum of care competitive funded projects out there. And so they'll be looking at that performance data, and if the data quality is bad, then the performance data, you can't rely on it. So it's almost as if the data check and the data monitoring has to happen before we look at the performance data, or the performance evaluation committee, the PEC, is looking at inaccurate data and then scoring agencies on things like, I should send this out to you so you can take a look at it, but they'll look at the homeless, if are people literally homeless coming into the program. They'll look at exits to permanent housing. They'll look at the time that it took for persons to get into housing, all kinds of things like that. But if the data quality in HMIS is poor, then the performance evaluation committee is looking at performance data and scoring agencies on numbers that aren't good. So.
Thank you, Susie. Shanley, I guess then the answer would be, obviously sharing that information with those actual agencies, but then sharing it with any of the committees that needed that information as well. That would be my recommendation, just to be as helpful as possible to the agencies.
I think sharing too, like so like the data committee would be interested. I think this committee, kind of our thought process of, do we share this like on our website or something, or with the planning council, or and using that piece as like a motivator or whatever you want to call it. People want to show their good data and their compliance, things like that too. And that is something that we can talk about as a group, or maybe we start doing that in the future. And the first round is, not shared, or do we share it and de-identify the names of the agencies and say, this is what we're working with? There are a couple different ways that we could go.
I kind of like that. I'm reminded that the VA, they do a quarterly review with the GPD programs, and how they do it is they tell you what your agency has done, and then they show, without giving names, how you rank against the rest of they call it a VISN, the area that you are in, and then also the country. So I think doing it that way, I don't know that we would benefit by calling people out, or and this is collaborative. So I think it's in our interest for all of us to do well. So I think showing it together, to me, like you just said, makes makes it more that together. And remember we, well, I guess it's back to Amanda time when some of the agencies were struggling, and she actually collaborated and had one of our staff members go and show and say how they did it. So that's my 2 cents.
I agree. I like the idea of sharing the information, but de-identifying. I think that maybe will encourage more people to participate and everything. But also, like Martina said, it shows we're kind of all in this together and kind of where we can help each other out and stuff without calling anybody out.
And then Rachel and Shanley, had this out of curiosity, what about the DV programs and the fact that they're entering into, compatible systems, but a different one than everybody else? How do they run a data quality check, and how do you monitor that with them? I should know this.
So their comparable databases would have a similar like APR report or data quality reports that they can run. And potentially in the future, we could work with our DV agencies to share, like, here's what we do for our data quality plan and data quality monitoring plan. But since they're not technically HMIS participating agencies, I think maybe we can push that back a little bit. I don't think it needs to be included necessarily at the beginning, since we're talking specifically HMIS participating agencies. I'm open to feedback though.
You can make up awards for the top data quality agencies.
It's a really good idea. Or just give them extra NOFA points.
It can actually be called the Shanley, I think. the Shanley Award. What do you think?
I like it.
You get lunch
working
with
group.
family.
Oh my gosh, cute. Okay.
Actually, that's a great idea in terms of some bonus points for the COC competition. Shanley, we were working on some sort of threshold of data quality for the Continuum of Care competition. And then we saw, at least, our MDHA's Shelter Plus Care program was not looking like it was even meeting that threshold. So rather than like penalizing, if they've got some really cool and, high quality data, giving a few bonus points in the Continuum of Care competition wouldn't be a bad idea. Be aspirational kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that once we
great.
roll out this plan and decide how it will work, then the Performance Evaluation Committee can decide how they want to adapt it to their specifically COC funding ideas.
Well, this is definitely a PEC topic, but you could also give points for high performers for each like data, for each like metric, that we're looking at for the NOFA. So we have like a top performer award for like, I don't know, length of stay or whatever we're looking at,
When you all get the draft copy, there is actually a section for incentives and enforcements. And so when you're reviewing it and adding edits, any sort of thing like that you could think of or brainstorm up, that's super helpful feedback. So pay attention to that section with all of your creative ideas. So it sounds like what we're saying is that, at least as a starting point, it makes sense that the feedback and results of the monitoring visits is definitely shared with the agency. And then when it's dispersed out to the community, it's done so with agencies' names removed, so that we're still sort of seeing the results, but not in a way that makes it feel punitive in any way. Okay, cool. Well, there's one more brief topic or question, and that is, and I don't know if we talk about this right now or not, but HUD technical assistance did say that it would be important as part of the data quality plan to include some sort of corrective action plan. So for agencies that fall below the benchmarks, what happens? And so we did look at some other examples where people lose licenses if it gets that serious or something like that, or if there's like a really blatant offense with security or something and a whole agency could lose access. And again, I don't know if we should sort of plop in the standard language that's been used across the country, or if anyone has any specific thoughts that we want to discuss.
Shanley, what is the standard language?
So essentially in the quarterly self-checks, well, and this is where it gets a little blurry, particularly if we're just encouraging those as a starting point and not requiring them, but that throughout the year, we're looking at those with the HMIS lead and trying to find patterns of concern and sort of prove your diligence to correcting those throughout the year, so that if at the monitoring visit, those things are still a concern and have not been addressed, that something would happen. Either those reports would be made public for this committee to decide the action plan, or specific users or agencies would lose access. It's a bit general. I've not seen like a super laid out plan exactly like word for word, but typically there's an authority that takes action at that point when it's necessary, which I would assume would be this committee.
I would think so. I feel like we're the ones that decide if they can have HMIS access to begin with. So I do kind of feel like we would be the ones who would enforce a corrective action plan. And maybe we kind of start with the standard language, and then when we're reviewing the document, we can kind of put edits in and then bring it back to the committee to discuss. That's kind of my idea on it.
I'd be okay with that. I think we need some time to think through that, because we don't want to, you know, we've decided that these agencies are valuable to our HMIS. So if we monitor them after first year and then they're not doing well, then I don't think that we can just kick them out. So I agree. Part of me is like, is it almost like a case by case basis? You know, what are, like, if it's major infringement and security, yes. I mean, I don't think there's too much talk, but is it one or two people that just can't get it? And then could we work with the agency? I don't know that there's one corrective action that fits all, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'd like some time to think about that.
And I can pull together some examples from other communities and send maybe a few different examples that you all can look at and review to think through what you think makes sense as a starting point for our community. And I agree. I mean, the goal would never be to remove an agency or a user, and which is why we want to do a lot of checks throughout the year to avoid that in the first place. But if it got to that point, what do we do? So I'll pull together some examples and send that when I send the draft form. Okay, whoa, this was amazing. Those were the big questions remaining in the monitoring plan portion. So what I'm going to do is take all of your feedback and add it to the draft form. And again, I'll make sure that that goes out before Thursday next week. Thank you all. That was awesome. Great feedback.
Thank you, Shanley. I know you put a lot of work into that, and we really appreciate it. All right, next up on the agenda, Rachel's going to kind of start the discussion talking about licensing in the community and different users and all of that sort of thing.
Thank you. Okay, so in our HMIS, each user is assigned a license, and we have a set amount of licenses. Basically, historically, the HMIS lead has always paid for all of these licenses and distributed them, not willy-nilly, but that might be the only word I can think of. We've honestly never run into the problem of getting low until recently. So that's led us to think about, okay, how do we handle this going forward? Talking to other communities and looking at their policies and procedures and things like that, a lot of COCs have a policy on how they distribute licenses, who pays for them. There's a wide range. Some COCs, the HMIS lead pays for all of the licenses. Some COCs, the agencies pay for all of the licenses. Some there's a mix, like if an agency is required to use HMIS for federal reporting, things like that, maybe they get 2 or 3 licenses free, and then beyond that, the agency pays for them with their grant funding. So there are a lot of different ways we can go with this. We kind of are living on the edge. There's turnover, obviously, so people leave, and we're able to reallocate those licenses to other users. We also, based on the policies and procedures, move licenses to inactive if someone hasn't logged in for 60 days. So, but we've gotten to this place where we had no procedures around who can get a license. So there are a handful of agencies with like over 20. And then there are a couple with just like one allocated person who does all of the entry for that agency. And that's based on, you know, agencies' staffing models and their workflow and what has worked for them and stuff. But since we keep getting so close to running out, we need to make a plan that is sustainable. So we have, tried to collect information about how other places are doing it, but we would like any feedback or ideas from this group about what you think is reasonable and how we can implement that. And then if we do decide that agencies can or should pay for all or some of their licenses, how to implement that. And then we will then go through all the hoops of how will we get agencies to pay, like the HMIS lead through Metro, which is going to be a whole thing, to pay our vendor through our contract with the HMIS software, et cetera, et cetera. So a couple things to think about. But we can start with just any thoughts about allocation, thoughts about agencies paying for some or all of their licenses.
I mean, making agencies enter data into HMIS is a painful process. And to me, it rubs salt in the wound to ask them to bleed and sweat and look at their data quality and then tell them, yeah, but now you got to pay for this. I know there's a cost to it. So I don't have to enter data into HMIS, but pushing agencies to do that just seems to be, and asking them to pay that's a big one. I would say I'm probably going to be flogged publicly for it, but we've got a whole lot of ESG money at MDHA, and there's a lot of admin money that came with that. So I would ask MDHA for a little assistance, particularly as it relates to the ESG funded agencies, under the CARES Act, and just see what they say. So that would be, a TREVA or an AMEL question. Judy's fully thought of it already, but.
That's a good point. And so you're right, like the salt in the wound, we're trying really hard to push some of the smaller agencies where funding for licenses might just not be realistic. So there is federal funding. So agencies that are federally funded and required to enter data typically have access to administrative dollars. And so that could pay for, or in the future, they could request for that to pay for the licenses to enter their required data for that grant. So one of the ways we could consider subsidizing the licenses is that way.
Great question, and Susie, great answer, and Shanley, great segue. I think that also being mindful of even those agencies that are federally funded, most of the admin dollars go to the source, not necessarily to the agency. Say, for example, the ESG admin dollars go to MDHA. They don't go to the agencies that applied. There is a little bit of indirect in there, but not nearly enough to cover the cost of administering the grant, along with the support services and direct services that go out. Because HMIS is such a tedious process, and because we're trying to get the entire community actively involved in entering into this tedious process, I definitely agree with Susie. You can't rub salt in the wound, because there's a lot of agencies that choose not to get federal funds because they don't want to enter into HMIS, and then to ask them to pay would not be, it just wouldn't be well in this situation. Also, agencies that do receive federal funds, it's HMIS, if it was a more user-friendly system, and or just maybe if it was different, or if it spoke to other systems, because a lot of agencies are still having to use other databases, like their own community or agency or national organization. We have different databases that we have to use. HMIS is just a portion of that. If it was easily able to build a bridge and sync data, that would be a good point. But at the rate that it's operating now, I don't know if that would, requiring agencies to pay, I don't know if that would be beneficial for us.
When it comes to paying for the licenses, is it you pay once and then you kind of have the license indefinitely, or do you have to pay for it each year? Because if we have to pay for it each year, then I am a little hesitant to rely on ESG funds that we got from the CARES Act and all of that stuff to pay for it, because theoretically COVID is going to end at some point, hopefully. And so we're not going to continue to receive all this extra ESG money.
It is an annual cost. And yes, I agree. I hear everything. The reality is,
what is the cost?
We're almost out of licenses.
How many licenses do we have? Yeah, and what's the cost? Thanks, Martina.
We have, we just looked at this, around 200.
240.
The cost is, we don't have, this is above us. It's like in the hundreds. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
300.
Well, I'm going to relinquish mine because I was going to use it to audit, but I think I feel more comfortable now with my staff. So, that's kind of, I think there's probably some people, I think if you wanted to send out some kind of notice for agencies to be a little bit more frugal with them, I'm sure there's a couple like me who are just, on there to monitor their own staff. But now that I've been through it, and actually it was more the training that I needed to understand what they were doing, more so than the license. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Definitely when I send each month, when I look at who hasn't logged in for over 60 days, I make sure to include, just so you know, like if you don't log in by the end of the week, we'll inactivate, and we have a limited number of licenses. So if you don't still need it, we'll reallocate it to another user. But it would not hurt to send that out to everybody, because there may be people who just, log in to check something every once in a while and aren't used for data entry.
Yeah.
Well, I know there are communities that, like, I'm going to use the Bowling Green area, for example. not only do you have to like pay to be a user of their or to have a license, you also have to pay for your program to be in there. So I'm not saying that we need to go that route, but I do know communities do this and they still have people that enter in. So maybe it is, we like explore the option of you get X amount free and then any over that number you have to pay for them. I know for Centerstone, that model would work for us. Like my program, we don't have enough money. We barely have enough money to pay our staff. So we definitely don't have money for that, but we have something like SSVF that frequently has more money than they need and they could afford to pay for users. And so maybe that is something kind of a combination of the two that we try to explore.
Yeah, I like that. I have a few thoughts, and I don't know if it's the time for them yet, but I agree like with the comments about like not requiring people to pay like right now. Like I think if we could find licenses that aren't being used and go back to the community and really like kind of shake the tree and be like, all right, like we got like even if we got like 10% back, that aren't being used, like that would help a bunch. But like I think we should revisit this, like especially if we're gonna RF, I've heard about, now that HMIS is at Metro, there will be an RFP process every, I don't know how many years, but we might be looking at an RFP process for the HMIS system next year or whenever that is. And I think attitudes could change. I've seen attitudes change around this, like where agencies are more willing to pay if they see a product that they really like, not, no shade thrown at the current system. But, or that could just be, you could have that attitude change and, it's a good time to implement a new policy because we have a new system and the system might be more expensive. It will likely be more expensive than the one we have now. I'm not sure, but it could be. So we may just need to get more creative and it just might be the reality that we have to cost share more than in the past. I think for now, trying to make it work with what we have is a good idea.
Susie, can the ESG funds like cover for X amount of years, or would it just be for the current, funding stream for 2021, 2022? Or yes, that's the way it would have to be.
It would follow the year that things are being funded. Yeah. And I can't remember who mentioned it. Stephanie, I think, but I can't remember. But yeah, that the big, huge CARES Act funds are going to be gone. And after that, we won't be as free to, donate to the cause.
Well, I was just thinking to Will's point, to at least fund it for, that time period would at least give us some lead time and help with the HMIS licenses. And then are there any plans to do any, I guess, bells and whistles in the sense of it communicating with other CRMs or anything like that would make it a more user-friendly approach, or no? No. Okay.
I think that's the dream. I think that's everyone's dream. It's very expensive, as it turns out, to do bridge systems between softwares. And so I think it's on a lot of people's radars and there's like exploration about it, but I don't know if it will happen.
That is all very helpful feedback, and we'll definitely start by sharing that with the larger population of users and maybe check in specifically with some of those agencies who have just a lot. Because they may not even realize that they have more than other agencies. They may just think, oh yeah, just everyone has a license. Licenses grow on trees.
And I know there's that push to get the street outreach folks entering into HMIS, the folks that they're seeing. are they already a part of the license mix, or are you going to have to give more licenses because of that?
A lot of them are because they're using HMIS for coordinated entry. So I think many of them are. There will still be, we're still asking or trying to onboard more new agencies too. So, but it's a little scary to ask people to join when not having licenses. We run into that every time, so. Cool. Okay, well, thank you all. That is a very helpful discussion, and we will update y'all next time. And then Shanley will share her draft before vacay. And yeah, that's all I've got.
All right, well, I guess if nobody has anything else, or there's no other comments or questions or anything, I think we can end for today. And 9 minutes early.
Beautiful.
Yes.
All right, thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Y'all
Thank
stay
you.
safe. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.